Hey guys, thank you for not really inviting me to this debate, but I am presenting myself here to answer Mr. William Lane Craig, Dr. William Lane Craig, on his objective moral values argument. I'm going to be doing videos like this because I am kind of frustrated with the responses sometimes that he gets from atheists in debates. I am not an atheist, but I personally think that there are much better responses, and I need to set him straight on a couple of things. For the record, I try to talk to William Lane Craig, and every time he tells me he's too busy. I ran into him at an apologetics conference, and he said he hopes I understand, but he has no time. So this is the only way I can respond in any meaningful way to what he's presenting on stage. So let's understand his argument. One is that without God, objective moral values wouldn't exist. Two, objective moral values, he claims, do exist, and therefore, three, God exists. Now, this is a valid logical argument, and I actually happen to agree with the first part. That's just my personal opinion, that if God created the world and knows how it works, and he revealed to humans very truthfully what the morality is, then I believe that that morality is objective in the sense that Dr. Craig defines. However, just because something could be true is not a proof that God exists. Yes, if God existed, then objective moral values would in fact be grounded in God in the way that Dr. Craig wants. And in fact, I concur with Friedrich Nietzsche, and I concur with many atheists as well as theologians, that if God does not exist, then objective moral values, as Dr. Craig defines them, would not exist. However, what I am here to tell you is that he hasn't proven that objective moral values exist, and therefore that is not a proof that God exists. And furthermore, Sam Harris and others have rightly pointed out that there are widespread moral values that most of humanity shares, and if you don't account for psychopaths or mentally disabled people and so forth, maybe one-year-old children, you will find that human nature is quite consistent on many different things. So here's the problem. Dr. Craig defines objective moral values like this. I'm quoting him. Objective means independent of people's, including one's own, opinion. Subjective means a matter of personal opinion. If we do have objective moral values, then in various circumstances in which we find ourselves, we're obligated or forbidden to do various actions regardless of what we think. So, in other words, objective means independent of human opinions, even a group of humans. So then why does Dr. Craig invariably in every single time appeal to his audience, one step, to prove step number two, and say, well, I am sure we can all agree that there are objective moral values. In other words, how can he define objective moral values as being independent of what people think, and then say that what people think is basically establishing that they exist? Now, Dr. Craig and many Christians respond to this like this. Your fallacy, Greg, is, by the way, they love to say, sort of assume right away, and just as a, by the way, you're wrong, and here's why. So your problem, Greg, is that you're confusing epistemology with ontology. You see, we may not know exactly what the objective moral values are. We might not even know a single one, but we know that they exist. Okay, that is a little interesting. Now, you've been comparing it, say, to math. 2 plus 2 is 4 objectively. If there were no humans on Earth, then those concepts, it would still be the case that 2 plus 2 would be 4. If you had two objects and together that group would be 4 objects. And many other mathematical and scientific propositions would be true. But when you are saying that, for example, torturing a child is wrong, I agree with you. But all that says is that I and you are in agreement. And if the whole world agrees with you, that still says, if the whole world of people agrees with you, that basically says that it's very widespread. If 99% of people in the world agree, then it's very widespread. In the scenario that the Nazis take over the world, and the Nazis have brainwashed everyone and killed everyone who doesn't agree in this crazy scenario, then the world consists of people who, at that point in time, their opinion is what grounds the moral judgments. They come from people. I'll illustrate. Suppose that there was objective humor, okay? Suppose I postulated that objectively funny jokes exist. I can't tell you any objectively funny jokes. In fact, maybe you disagree that they're funny, but you're just wrong, okay? If I had an objectively funny joke and it was divinely revealed to me that the joke is funny, and I told it to a room and 99% of the people just rolled their eyes, one guy laughed, maybe no one laughed, I could tell them they're wrong. The joke is funny, and you just can't see that. So in this case, it would be ludicrous. Most people would quickly say, no, humor has to come, the judgment of whether something's funny has to require people, a sense of humor. Your sense of humor is biological, but it's also dependent on nurture, where you grew up, what you did, how you were affected by your society. The same way the moral sense, the sense of morality, has in it very widespread elements, that we realize that we shouldn't punish someone who is innocent, that we shouldn't torture people for no reason, okay, that this is bad and it creates suffering. And this we can analyze with science because we have a goal. The goal is to minimize human suffering for no reason, and it is to maximize human well-being. You can also look at how Dr. Craig considers treatment of animals and consider whether his membership of a species and how he was brought up also affects his views there. So, again, you can analyze all this with relative morality. And relative morality is an actually useful mechanism to investigate and describe what is happening. For example, what do I mean when I say someone should do something? Now, what I mean by that is that there is an implied premise. A person should do something if they have a goal. The goal has to be mentioned. Sometimes it's implied. For example, if I want to do God's will, and God told me that this is what His will is, well, then I should do that thing. If I want to appear rational, and a certain way of responding would be irrational, it would appear irrational, then I shouldn't do it. But if I don't care about being irrational, for example, if I am talking to my neighbor, he's made a valid point, he's making it and I should listen to him, but there's a volcano that is currently erupting and my other overriding goal is to save my life, yeah, I'm going to maybe sacrifice what I should be doing in the conversation for the larger goal. And again, people's goals are varying from time to time. I'm not saying that people are constantly making the rational decisions. What I am saying is that there's a very consistent way, a very useful way of defining if someone should do something, and it is relative to what their goals are, or basically what they want to accomplish. Most people want to accomplish similar things. They want to, for example, survive. They want to feel happiness and joy. They want to feel fulfillment. They want to satisfy their hunger. All these things are goals, and we can assume they have those goals. So this is what a lot of morality actually is. When someone says you should do something, they're implying that you have a goal. They might be wrong, and if they're wrong about your goal, maybe you don't have to do that at all. So that's essentially what it is. If you do that thing you should do, and your goal still doesn't come about, then someone else should not blame you. If they want to be rational, they shouldn't blame your lack of doing it because you did it, and it wasn't your fault. At least you did that thing you were supposed to do. If that goal didn't come about, Wasn't your fault there. Now, let's look at absolute morality. Absolute morality would be basically saying, like, for example, condom use is bad, period. Just condom use is bad. Now, it may be that your partner has HIV. Yeah, okay, in that case, you're saving your life, potentially. So, yeah, you can use a condom. Okay, well, what if you're not saving your life? What if they have HPV? It would just be kind of very stigmatic and uncomfortable for you. So, if you turn to different religious traditions, they'll disagree. If you look at Protestants and Catholics, who had access to the epistemology of knowing which morally right thing there was to do? Clearly they disagreed. And on whose side was God when they were killing each other? So is religion really the answer to these things? So Dr. Craig would say that's all not relevant when it comes to these objective moral values. All we have to do is believe that they exist objectively, even though they are independent of what people believe. But we just have to believe the fact that they exist. Where else do you see this? In mathematics, you can actually have, to be fair, a proof that something exists while not being able to come up with an example of it. But that requires a very technical argument, and I don't see that argument being made. You're simply appealing to a bunch of people who are in your audience and hoping that they will say, yeah, I believe that there's at least one objective moral value that even if people didn't exist, that would still be like 2 + 2 is 4. Whereas in reality, just like humor, it requires people to be the judge. Now, I've heard other people say, okay, so you don't believe in moral realism. Okay, well, what if there was like a student who says, I don't believe in moral realism, and he gives this paper to his professor, and the professor says, what do you mean you don't believe that there's absolute right and wrong? The student says, yeah, there's not a single thing that is absolutely right and wrong. So the professor says, okay, I'll give you an F. And the student says, well, you can't do that. This is an outrage. The professor says, well, there's no absolute right and wrong, so I can do whatever I want. And the question is, well, how can the student possibly judge the professor if there's no absolute right and wrong? But of course, like I said, if judgment is relative to certain codes that were established, certain goals of, codes of organizations, the professor belongs to an organization called a university. The organization has a reputation. The reason for the grades is that they would mean something to whoever would see them. If the professors at this university was well known that they would just flip a coin or flip a 6-sided die and assign the grade, if that was well known to everybody, the grades would be useless. So the organization he belongs to has an incentive to have rules and enforce those rules, and it is those rules that the student is essentially referring to when he says it's an outrage. It's an outrage for the organization. I can sue someone by invoking a law that is in my jurisdiction, in the jurisdiction where we made the agreement. I don't have to always refer to a cosmic, universal morality in order to sue someone, or for there to be criminals. There doesn't have to be a universal morality. It just has to be a local law. So laws vary from place to place. If you look at Sharia law, for example, or you look at Jewish law, if there was a court system, homosexuals and thieves and people who engaged in certain acts which the law considers to be unacceptable and which were proven with 2 witnesses and so forth, would be put to death. In Western liberal democracies, we consider that to be barbaric. So who is right? Again, Dr. Craig would say we don't know, but there has to be an objective moral law. Well, doesn't reality bear out that different groups of people have different ideas and feel strongly about them? We feel that what they're doing is monstrous. For example, killing someone for having consensual sex with someone, not hurting anyone in private. They consider that God's law is better than human law, and democracy is elevating man over God. Who is right? Well, we don't know. It could be that God is right, and it could be that the Muslims are right, and Muhammad's revelation is correct. It could be Christians are right. It could be Jews are right. I am not making a judgment on that. I am simply saying it is not a proof. To simply claim that objective moral values exist, get some people in the audience to agree with you, all that shows is that they agree about something that's unproven, and then claim that you've proven it, your premise 3. Okay, if I agree with you about premise 2, then I will agree about premise 3. If I agree with premise 2 and 1, which I agree with 1, I will agree with your conclusion 3. However, I'm under no obligation to agree with premise 2. And what you will do is simply say, well, if you don't agree that torturing a child is wrong, then you're a psychopath. I mean, yeah, I agree with that reaction. I think just like a Catholic would look at, let's say Martin Luther would look at Jews and say, well, that's an abomination. We should just burn all their synagogues and try to get all these Jews to stop following Judaism. I mean, there could be this reaction, but what that does, or look at the Jews, the early Christian sect, the Nazarenes, how they persecuted them. These guys were worshiping in private, say. Yeah, they were proselytizing too. But even if they weren't, the Jews would probably raid their communes and basically say, you guys, you better get back to Judaism. The guys that were following Judaism in the first place. They're trying to demolish this sect. Why? Look at what they're doing. They are either excommunicating or punishing behavior. That's exactly what you would expect members of a community to do. In small communities, people have had morality. If you believe in evolution, let's just take even if you don't believe in evolution, you can see how the genetics would be passed on. Okay, you've got your small village, you've got people, and there's a reputation system. Everyone knows everyone in the small village. So reputation was a great enforcer. Sometimes more than the threat of violence, just threat of ostracism, threat that your children wouldn't be part of the community, threat that you couldn't get a wife or have children. So what happened was that if you fit into the community, you would be rewarded with many children and your genes would be passed on, right? So if the community considered something taboo or really bad, you would be very sensitive to it, and that would be a trait that would be genetically advantageous. So sensitivity to social cues and the community teaching the children from early on what their morality is a very big factor. We are social animals. Unlike some other animals, we are imprinted basically with a moral code that can be changed. It is hard, and I don't look. I have the Western liberal democratic morality. I have empathy for people. A lot of people have empathy. And calling someone a psychopath means they are lacking certain things physically. It could also mean that they are from some other group. And again, this is relative morality. This is groups. What is morality essentially here? A large component of it is groups, which share some human nature, have different ideas, and they enforce those ideas on children and on their community members who decide to be part of the group. If you're not conforming to such an extent that you're disrupting, if you're disrupting the working of the group, you can face consequences or simply have to leave. This was true in tribes. Now, what happened is when you get larger cities, a great book on this is Liars and Outliers by Bruce Schneier. If you get larger cities, the reputation aspect is lost. Now with the internet is kind of coming back because everyone has an identity, and that's a whole separate topic. But imagine now larger societies, okay, tourists come and the merchants kind of take advantage of them. They can fleece the tourists and lie to them and do all kinds of things. So eventually a reputation builds up around these merchants and they suffer. So they start policing each other to maintain their reputation. Now look what happens there. Reputation, again, becomes an enforcer where, in fact, they are enforcing it among themselves because their incentive is that their reputation be a certain way. If their reputation is that they're crooks and the tourists are steering away from them, that hurts them. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that relative morality is a great way to look at reality. It's useful, and you can actually make statements like, in this jurisdiction, this is illegal. In this community, this is considered bad and taboo and wrong. And you can also say that it is widespread in the human race to care about certain things. Yes, there will be some psychopaths, some people lacking empathy, and so forth. There will be degrees, in fact. But to claim that there are these platonic, objective, moral values out there, and we don't know what they are, can't come up with a single one, is not a proof. Let's see. I would like, since I'm doing this video, to just say a couple other things, and that's it. You, Dr. Craig, believe that the Bible is true. So then if your argument goes, we believe there are objective moral values, the objective moral values are grounded in God. Hey, look, God told us some of them. Let's read the book that we reliably wrote down what God said. Oh, in the book, okay, one of your examples is rape. Rape is wrong. Okay, yes, rape is wrong. So what should we do to the perpetrator? Today, we lock him up, and he unfortunately is being raped himself, probably in prison, because everyone is locked up and they have no sexual outlet. That's another story. But what is the proper way of dealing with rape? Well, you would have to say that you turn to the Bible, and it says right there, if a man rapes a woman, then he is obligated to marry her and cannot divorce her until the rest of his life. Well, in Christianity, you shouldn't divorce anyway. So, but be that as it may, he is obligated to marry her if she wants. Oh, and he also has to pay 50 shekels of silver. So, according to this, a really rich man could just go raping, and okay, I paid my 50 shekels of silver. I am let off the hook now. But again, that violates our current moral intuition, the one you just appealed to, saying that we believe that they're objective moral values. You can't say that we feel they're objective moral values. Oh, look, here's an example of one, because we've established that there's a God, and then somehow you believe that God gave these moral values. That would then, in a way, kind of undermine your whole premise that God gave these values, because our intuition that says these values exist also says they shouldn't be this. So how can you use the intuition that says they shouldn't be this and have an argument that says they should be this and claim that is a proof of this is what they are? And we can apply the same thing to people having gay sex, men with men having gay sex. If you look in the Bible, if there's a competent court system and we execute these men, that would violate a lot of people's intuitions today. You can't appeal to these intuitions then. You can't have it both ways. Okay, so I guess there's a couple other things I could say, but I'll just leave it at that. Okay, one other thing. Notions change. Can you really understand what it's like to be an ancient Spartan back in the day? To kill your own child, to have your wife throw a child off a cliff because the child was deformed, or maybe because it was a girl. Okay, at that time they didn't know it was a girl until it was born. They didn't know it was deformed until it was born. Once they knew, let's say it was deformed, they could make the argument that they are actually helping the child not to have a long, conscious, bad life, like you would be saying with animals. They would be saying with children who haven't developed a full consciousness. Someone like Peter Singer would be comparing this to what we do today. Today we think that is monstrous. And I personally think that since the child now can be saved and medicine has improved, that is a huge, huge game changer. But of course that also can apply to old people today. Today, a lot of people would think it's more moral to have someone who's suffering just give them euthanasia and have them become young and move to Asia. No, just have them peacefully pass away. But is this moral? Is it not moral? I mean, what is it more moral to have them suffer until they die of natural causes? Maybe we could prolong their life as much as possible. Again, these are not objective. These are things that societies would debate, and facts like medicine and capabilities would then change. Dr. Craig agrees with this, which is why he's careful to say objective, not absolute moral values, because circumstances can change. But again, you can't simply say objective moral values exist. Hey guys, do you agree with me? Yes. Okay, well, you don't, so just leave. No, that just proves that what you're doing is subjective, and you're just excluding people who don't agree with you. That's fine. That is how we reason in general. I believe something, you believe something. If we can't find the common ground at all, there's nothing to discuss. We have to find some common ground. That is what science is based on. That is what Sam Harris has been saying. And I think you can use science to see what is more conducive to human prosperity. Some questions are hard, like economics. We don't necessarily know which economic policies are good. We can argue with libertarians, with this and that, and that's another subject. But at the end of the day, there are widespread moral values, and when you say objective moral values, all you're proving is that there are moral values that are widespread in the human population today, and not maybe 50,000 years ago. Well, that's great, but that's not a proof. Just want to say, for the record, that I agree the other way, that if God exists, I personally would take his revelation, I would believe it, and then I would say that this is an objective basis for action. But as far as morality is concerned, when you look at Abraham saying, "Will not the judge of the world do right?" He's making a judgment. The key word is he is making a judgment. I agree with you. A psychopath does not fit into society. These are all relative to other people and opinions. Anyways, thank you very much. And I hope I addressed sufficiently why I don't consider this to be an argument for a proof for the existence of God.